Alrighty, welcome back to Shut Up and Ball. I am Aaron, accompanied by Mr. John Harris, as always. And we are here to react/wrap up the regular season, basically. So we'll dive right into that shortly. And every game, obviously. And before we do so, if you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, as we're on the road to 1,000 subs there. And then if you're listening on a podcast, audio medium, rate, comment, however you can rate and review there, please, would be appreciated. But anyhow, let's dive right into the results of this week. Obviously, we had no Thursday night game. I did have a couple of Saturday games, starting with the Kansas City Chiefs taking care of business, for lack of a better phrase, against the Las Vegas Raiders, 31-13. At one point, they were doing ring around the rosy, and unfortunately, that play got called back. That didn't matter, John, as they still punched it in the very next play. That was the type of day that Kansas City kind of had. Any thoughts in regards to Kansas City handling business against the Raiders here?
Well, watching it, obviously, just spoiler alert too, I did not get my locks. I had the big week where I needed to get a ton of locks to make the comeback. This was a game that I did not lock. I did correctly choose Kansas City, and I almost locked it. And of course, pretty early on, that first half, Kansas City dominates. They're up 24-3, and I'm just sitting there like, I knew I should have done it. Like, backup quarterback for the Raiders. The Chiefs tend to beat the Raiders. There's been a lot of big victories in the past. I guess just being burned by double-digit victories, throughout the year just kind of, or not double-digit victories, but bigger spreads, like over a touchdown, it just kind of scarred me a little bit. But of course, we'll get into it later. There was another one that I actually did choose to go on, and I got that one wrong. But this one I didn't lock. But regardless, I mean, the Chiefs didn't really have a ton to play for outside of the fact that they were securing the first seed, the first round bye. They did it. I don't think many people doubted that they would. And for the Raiders, once again, eliminated from the playoffs, not playing for much. Obviously, they have benched Derek Carr. There's just, with the Raiders, there was just a lot going on. And so for this game, it more so just felt like, all right, let's get the season over with. We got 6 wins. If we win this, we get 7. This is basically jockeying for slightly different draft positions. So honestly, for them, losing was the better option long term, just because it helps your draft stock a little bit. But other than that, I think both teams kind of got away with what they really needed. Maybe the Raiders didn't want to lose, but I'm sure the ownership probably isn't too upset considering they were already eliminated from the playoffs. So not too much else to say about this one, outside of the fact that, man, I wish I did lock it.
Yeah. Only other thing I want to add is my baller of the week, and it is going to be Chandler Jones, 2.5 sacks, constant disruption. I mean, since Aaron Donald's, obviously not playing, I think Chandler Jones is the next guy up in terms of best interior defensive lineman of the playoff teams, and probably just in the league. As obviously he was a force in the sack with 2.5 sacks, but also
Talking about Chris Jones, right?
Why am I saying Chandler Jones? Wrong C. Jones. I'm sorry.
Once you said interior defensive lineman, I was like, this is weird.
Sorry.
Anyway,
Chandler Jones, let me check. Did he even play this game? I don't think he even played this game. At least didn't put up any stat line. Sorry, Chris Jones, the Chiefs defensive tackle / defensive lineman. But yeah, constant force in the run game, slowing down. You're not muted, by the way. Oh, you were. Okay. Constantly slowing down Josh Jacobs. He didn't really get going, and was never really let Jarrett Stidham get into a rhythm, kind of like we saw last week. But you mentioned the Chiefs. The offense, we're kind of seeing they can do in different ways right now. Holmes only, quote unquote, only 200 yards passing, but he was 18 for 26. So taking the dink and dunks and just letting his guys make plays. And then they were pretty successful in the run game too. Isaiah Pacheco was really efficient, broke off a 30-yarder. And even Ronald Jones got involved too. And we've obviously seen Jared McKinnon kind of be involved in other ways, although he didn't do much, but besides get a touchdown. Was nice to see Kadarius Toney to get involved once again. You were all over it, but we were both saying this when the Giants and him were beefing, to say, for lack of a better phrase. Like, I just don't understand. Like, just get the guy out in the field if he can play, obviously, if he's healthy, and just give him opportunities. It's like what I said with the Packers. When early in the season when Rodgers didn't trust Watson, but it's like, just he's a rookie. He's gonna mess up. Just let him play a little more. If he messes up just initially, like it would kill anyone's confidence if you just don't even give an opportunity. So nonetheless, great job by Kansas City handling their business. And we get to see Andy Reid off a bye week whenever they do play in the divisional round. But as John mentioned, locked up the 1 seed, so they get next week off in doing so. So a crucial win for the Chiefs to get that free. They get that bye week and the home field advantage, of course. Now we go to another game on Saturday that did determine playoffs, which was the Jacksonville Jaguars facing off against the Tennessee Titans and Josh Dobbs. Jaguars win this one 20-16, John. A little bit closer, definitely than you anticipated. You had the Jags here, and honestly, I did too. But anyhow, thoughts on the Jaguars taking care of business and punching their ticket to the playoffs?
Yeah, I just think this is one of those games where you really see the overall lack of versatility from the Titans. I mean, Josh Dobbs, for a guy who was, I guess, I don't even know if he was technically on their like actual active roster when Ryan Tannehill was healthy. He might have been on a practice squad somewhere. I'm not exactly sure. But for a guy who was at best their third quarterback throughout the year, like I said, if he was even actually on the team, I think that he did what you want to ask from him, like 32 rushing yards, 179 passing yards, and a touchdown, largely efficient. The tough part was the turnovers. I believe he lost a fumble. I might be wrong on who lost that one, but I'm pretty sure it was Josh Dobbs. And he did throw the interception. And so that's kind of the difference maker of this game, right? Because on the Jaguars side, they did lose a fumble, but no interceptions from Trevor Lawrence. Although they didn't really have any run game, which they tried to run it. They didn't they ran it 10 times outside of Trevor Lawrence, which are Michael Hasty and Travis Etienne, and both of them couldn't even eclipse 2.5 yards per carry. They had 22 total yards in those 10 runs. So like it was tough sledding. So I'm not surprised that they completely went away from it. Trevor Lawrence throws the ball 32 times. And for a quarterback that has, had so much pedigree and hype and all these things and has started to prove himself this year, I think he responded. It wasn't a game where he lit up the box score, but in what basically was a playoff game, I think that that's the kind of performance that you want from your quarterback. Like I said, he didn't carry them by any means because their defense only allowed 16 points. They did their job. But in a game that's going to be tight, it's going to be tough. Like the other coach on the sideline is, coaching his team up so well that the smallest of errors could cost you this game. I thought that Trevor Lawrence did a really good job of just taking care of the ball throughout the game, taking what the defense gave him. There was a lot of times earlier this year, that he would just try to force the issue. Didn't do that in this one. And so, yeah, just shout out to the Jaguars, their defense, Trevor Lawrence. Also, I want it to be known because some people might look at Derrick Henry and say, oh my gosh, 109 rushing yards. Like, how did the Jaguars win this game? But I think the key there is they forced Tennessee to really grind it out. He got 109 rushing yards, but he did it averaging 3.5 yards per carry. So it wasn't like he just got whatever he wanted and was super efficient. This was a tough, grind it out kind of a game for the Titans. And that's why I wanted to bring up the turnovers, because if you're forcing the Titans to sustain these incredibly long drives, you're going to get more situations where Josh Dobbs could potentially turn the ball over, where somebody might fumble, where a receiver drops a pass on a crucial down. Just not allowing them to have quick scoring drives, I think is what really made the difference for the Jaguars and their defense. And like I said, on the other side, when the Jaguars had to take long drives, Trevor Lawrence, he played it safe. So good win for the Jaguars. I'm excited to see them in the playoffs. It is interesting that both of us, I think, said that we felt they could probably hit 10 wins, around 9 wins. That's what they got. We didn't expect them to win the division with that. But I think it's really cool to see the progression the Jaguars have made.
Yeah. I do want to add, I completely agree with everything you said about Trevor Lawrence, just being nitpicky for one thing, especially since they're behind at that point. Did miss that one touchdown throw. I think it's the left corner. And he knew it too. I think I think it was Christian Kirk he overthrew. There was somebody just wide open in the back end, but he overthrew him. But yeah, for the most part, took care of the ball, like you mentioned, which is very key in this game. And in regards to Tennessee, I mean, once again, I think hopefully this makes Tennessee fans or just fans in general maybe appreciate Ryan Tannehill a little bit more, and A.J. Brown, of course. But I think Tannehill, too, helps open up their deep, intermediate size deep shots off the Derrick Henry runs when they're obviously the defense is overplaying that. But also, too, like I said, missing the A.J. Brown. Although good to see Traylon Burks get a little involved, but it's still a typical Tennessee game where the tight ends, Okonkwo and Austin Hooper, they're two of the top three leading receivers and they're tight ends. And yeah, you mentioned Tennessee, Mike Vrabel, very good at coaching these guys up for the moments, even though they were, like I said, on their third string quarterback, have had this mishmash of wide receivers, been missing guys on defense too, missing both their pass rushers, obviously lost. I don't know why Harold Landry earlier in the season, but then Bud Dupree on IR still found ways to, like you mentioned, slow down Jacksonville, especially in the run game, and make life tough on the pass game. It's just unfortunate. I was a little surprised they called it a fumble. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't, but it was. I was ready for the league to call it, the fumble that Josh Allen, the defensive end Josh Allen, took back that Rayshon Jenkins forced. I was a little bit surprised that they didn't take more time, and B, I don't know, I was worried they were going to call incomplete pass because the arm was kind of going forward. It was it got jarred loose right when he was starting to go forward, so I was worried they were just going to call it a deflection. But I think they did the whole empty hand thing. I think it was the right call. But I'm not saying it's wrong. I just, knowing how inconsistent the calls have been this year, I was expecting it to be more controversial.
I will say, I think that's one of those situations where it's once again, confusing how there's not technology for that kind of stuff. Literally, I always come back to this example. In soccer, we literally have technology to see if the ball has officially crossed the goal line, and they can recreate it with all the sensors they have. So you can just see a flat picture of this is the line, this is the edge of the ball. And if you can see that little gap of blue there, then there you go. And I'm surprised there isn't similar technology of a tracker in the ball, and you can see the line of the ball moving forward at what point, all that kind of stuff, to just help in those kind of decisions. Because although I agree with you, I do think it was the right call. Just those really close ones, it always just confuses me because it feels like technology has advanced so far that we could be getting so many more of these calls correctly and so quickly too. This stuff works so fast that I don't know. I think it's just strange.
Yeah, sorry to add on that point before we move on to the next game too. Even tennis has the technology that checks was it out or something. I used to watch tennis with my stepfather, and once again, this was 10, 15 years ago that tennis has had this. So yeah, NFL. Once again, we are urging billions of dollars. You could advance your game a little bit more. I suppose it's relying on these no offense to the referees, do a great job, or I know it's a tough job, but these old guys, put a lot on them, especially now that we're in the betting age and such. But anyhow, those were the Saturday results. Jacksonville, like John mentioned, won the division, punches their ticket into the playoffs, and for Tennessee, obviously they miss out now, and definitely have some things to look forward to as they did fire their offensive coordinator after this game, and they also let go of their GM, obviously a few weeks earlier. So we'll see how Vrabel fills in those holes. But now we go over to Atlanta for the Sunday games. That's where we're going to start, where the Falcons took care of business. They win 30-17. Oddly enough, Brady did play a bit in this game. Now, granted, he only Blaine Gabbert and Kyle Trask got thrown in, so that's why I don't know a better phrase to say it, but that's probably why Atlanta won. Didn't have my eye too much on this game, John. What were your thoughts on Atlanta getting a confidence win going into the offseason?
Yeah, surprisingly enough, I have a friend who's a Falcons fan, and you take what you can get, but this is technically the first time in the Atlanta Falcons history that they have beaten Tom Brady. So shout out to them because I guess that had never happened. I didn't know that, but apparently that had never happened. For this game, it was meaningless. I do think the only part that annoys me about the fact that this game went the way it did is that we're going to hear the talking point that the Buccaneers were a losing team making it in the playoffs now, when in reality, they were 8-8. The game literally didn't matter. So who cares if they win or lose? If they won, they're 9-8, and that talking point all of a sudden never gets made. But we're going to hear that the entire postseason. And I bring that up now because I don't think this will happen, But you never know. In the the possibility that the Buccaneers did make a championship run and Tom Brady was to get another ring, you would hear that narrative like crazy. Like, oh my gosh, this is Tom Brady's most impressive wing. They had a losing record and then he carried them to the playoffs or some stuff like that. Otherwise, I think this is one of those games where in most situations for the Falcons, I'd be like, why are you guys trying to win? Like, you want to get a better draft pick, but they're a very young team. You got Desmond Ridder, you got Tyler Algier, Drake London, and all three balled out. Like, all three honestly were in consideration for my ball of the week. I didn't choose them because, like I said, it was kind of a meaningless game. Starters arrest, all that stuff. But I really liked what I saw out of Atlanta. I thought this was a great game to end the year on. Like you said, a confidence builder. By far, Desmond Ridder's best game of the season. 19 of 30, 224, and 2 touchdowns. Like great performance. Like that's what you want to see if you're an organization from your young quarterback. And obviously it kind of excites you for next year when Cordell Patterson's more healthy, when Kyle Pitts is back, when ideally maybe you've drafted another weapon, maybe some offensive line help, whatever it is, you just got more chemistry. I think this is a really exciting game for the Falcons. Also, Algier, 135 on the ground, Drake London, 120 through the air. Like just your young guys, your rookie draft class, they balled out in this game. And although, like I said, a meaningless game, I think for the Falcons, they're probably very happy about the things that they saw in this performance. And then for the Buccaneers, like I said, it truly does not matter what happened in this game. I did not pay attention, so I do not know if they just played bad or anything like that. But based on the overall stats, it doesn't seem like it. I mean, they only had 1 turnover. They only had 3 penalties. It just seems like overall, eventually, they just sat the starters. There was really no point to playing. Wanted to get that little bit of extra bit of rest. And so, yeah, there wasn't any like blaring issues like another team that we'll talk about later in another meaningless game.
I don't have much else to add. You kind of hit it all. So good win for Atlanta. And they also covered the spread. Both of us didn't even think that they would. Even if Tampa maybe rest of their starters. But so, yeah, good on Atlanta for surprising us there. And once again, that's what's up.
I was just gonna add. By the way, I didn't mention this. These were my first 2 locks, the Jacksonville and the Buccaneers game, and instantly just busted my locks. Like I said, I needed like 9 or whatever I picked, and instantly right off the bat busted. I think I got like 4 more wrong throughout the day. So, bad day anyway, but like literally the second game of the week, Saturday night, busted, and then Sunday morning busted again. Like, yeah.
Oh, yeah, So, but by the time John went to sleep Saturday, or by the time Titans game was over, John knew that locks were done. But speaking of you missing those 2, these next 2 are my locks that I had. Going to start with Buffalo. Obviously, it was an emotional game at Buffalo, but they handled their business, riding that emotion, beating the Patriots 35-23. Just going to spoil right now, my ball of the week, Nyheim Hines, opening kickoff. Amazing. And then not only that, another one too. It's great to see him, making plays, in special teams, obviously, but hopefully they can get him more involved in the offense too. But regardless, Buffalo pulls this one out, eliminates New England from the playoffs essentially because the Patriots needed help after they lost. Any thoughts in regards to Josh Allen and the Bills getting the big win here, basically, John?
This game was interesting for a couple reasons. First off, I don't know if it was meaningless because the Chiefs had already won. So the Chiefs had clinched first round bye on Saturday. So in terms of that, the game did not mean much for the first seed. But I don't know, had they lost, if between them and the Bengals, seeding would have changed. As of right now, they're the 2nd seed, and I don't know. Regardless, as the 2nd seed, they're going to play the 7th seed, which in the AFC is the Miami Dolphins. Spoiler alert, we're going to get in that game later. But it's interesting because if the Bills actually held the tiebreaker over the Bengals, they technically would have controlled who they could play in the first round. Because if they allowed the Patriots to win, then the Patriots would play them in the first round. And if they beat them, then they play potentially the Dolphins. I honestly don't think the Bills coaching staff really considered any of that whatsoever. Because it's like, we beat both these teams already, so who cares? Like, let's just go out there and play our game. But yeah, great win for the Bills. I expected the Patriots to come out firing on all cylinders, and they did in part. Like Mac Jones had 3 touchdowns, but then you also look at the turnovers, and he's got 3 of those as well. Now, Buffalo also had 3 turnovers, and so the turnover battle was for the most part the same. But this was one of those games where we talk about you have to win all 3 phases. The Patriots special teams just did not come through. I mean, they allowed 2 return touchdowns to Naheem Hines. Like you said, your baller of the week. I mean, think about it. If their special teams could have came through, maybe you get a stop on one of those drives. The other one, you allow a field goal or something. That removes about 11 points from the board, and all of a sudden, this is a really tight game. Actually, it might have been the full 12. Regardless, whatever. You remove points from this board, and this is a really tight game because the Bills won by 12. Those 2 touchdowns right there were the reason that it wasn't close and the reason the Bills covered. And you got to win all 3 phases of the game. That's something the Patriots were historically so amazing at. With Adam Vinatieri and Gostkowski and all these guys, and that was something they did in this game, and a win and get in game for them. They couldn't get it done, and I think it's in large part to the special teams, because also the turnovers for the Patriots didn't help, because if your defense gets you 3 turnovers and technically they only allowed 21 points, I felt like the Patriots defense for the most part did their job. But it is what it is. Tough way to go out for the Patriots.
Yeah, so we'll see what they do in this offseason, personnel-wise, in terms of offensive staff, because that obviously, for good reason, has been a widely criticized and looked at thing. We'll see if Matt Patricia's still going to be calling plays, or if they get someone else in there for Mac Jones, because I think we all, especially myself, I was high on Mac Jones coming out, really good rookie year, but then, Josh McDaniels leaves, and they didn't really add much to that offense weapon-wise, so I'm not too shocked that there was a bit of a statistical regression here. It was a tough year for him. So hopefully New England can get him some help, get him back on the right track, and make him look good again. And then, but yeah, like you mentioned though, John, New England, we're seeing though, at least, looking forward in the future, 2023, 2024 season, looking like defense is starting to come together. It sounds like it feels like they've got some guys there. We obviously know that they're very persistent with the run game. So it's just a matter of, I feel like, getting weapons and refining that offense, schematically. So, and then, yeah, Bills, just good confidence win, and good to see some explosive plays out of their offense too. We haven't seen that many in recent weeks. A lot of teams seem like have been kind of making them kind of grind it out. No big plays, just be surgical, which they can be, but it's good to see Stephon Diggs, with 104 yards, and then even John Brown off his couch, who was on his couch basically a month ago, came and had a big play off of Josh Allen, making magic basically. So Buffalo gets the big win. Like John mentioned, they kind of keep the number 2 seed for the AFC. So they will match up with the 6th seed, which we'll go over all that later or at another time. But now we go to my other lock that I did hit. So it was unfortunate that John missed his locks and I got my 2. This one was the Minnesota Vikings. They win 29-13, bouncing back from that tough loss at Green Bay. Although once again here, kind of like the Buccaneers threw in some of their backups per se at some point. Nick Mullins got plenty of run here, as well as Alexander Madison. And then obviously the Bears, it was Nathan Peterman at quarterback. So any thoughts in regards to this game, John, for either team?
Not a ton. I mean, like you said, this game didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, outside of it affected seeding a little bit, or could have affected seeding a little bit for the Vikings. In the end, it didn't, because the teams in front of them, I believe, all won. And then the only thing that really mattered in this one is the fact that the Houston Texans, in a game that we're going to talk about later, did win, which secures the number 1 overall pick for Chicago. I think that's really big, just because the difference between number 1 and number 2, like the trade offers you can probably get, could just be that much sweeter. And for Chicago, in a situation where they already have their quarterback in Justin Fields, although their GM, despite him saying that he would have to be absolutely blown away to take a different quarterback, didn't deny that they wouldn't take a quarterback, which I guess, keep your options open. But I don't know. Anyway, they have their quarterback, so you have the option to trade down and get just a treasure trove of draft picks, or take the best player available, someone that you think could be a really high impact guy for the future moving forward. So yeah, I don't take much away from this game. I guess it's nice for Minnesota to have a game that wasn't like a super tight sweat kind of a game. Like, you came out here, you won by 16. I don't know. I just think that throughout this game, there wasn't much to play for the Bears outside of really losing, and that's what they got. And then for the Vikings, once again, not a lot to play for, but you got the job done. And, maybe it builds a little bit of confidence moving forward, because everybody's calling you frauds and one-score games and all this kind of stuff. The point differential and maybe a 16-point victory going into the playoffs is just kind of what you need to motivate you a little bit.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add in regards to the Vikings. Like you mentioned, they kind of just took care of business there, and it's a pretty bad Bears defense, like we've mentioned before. I do want to preface just a thought point, maybe a perspective in regards to, you mentioned that, the Bears exercised the option of maybe taking a quarterback at number one. And I'm just guessing maybe they're just trying to maybe get the Texans or some other team. It's already early. I think it's just early mind games. Let's get them to trade up, because remember too, the Bears don't have their second round pick, which obviously they have the worst record. So it's
true. So they maybe do have the Ravens second round pick though. So
yeah, but it's
a
later round.
Yeah.
So yeah, but regardless, maybe they're trying to get when the teams behind them that just trying to implant in their mind that, okay, maybe we have to trade up so that the Bears don't do something weird, or even let another team trade up to get the quarterback they want.
Just for the record, if the Texans trade up, after having the number one selection until the final week and then trading assets to get back up to it, I would laugh.
Yeah,
so hard.
I think it's more like and
like someone else.
I agree
yeah,
but like the Colts are like at 4.
Right,
they may want to say like, we really like this one guy. Let's leapfrog the Texans, get our
Absolutely.
guy.
That could actually be very realistic, because divisional opponents, you want to get that guy, so the Texans
and
don't kind of
the Colts, and we'll talk about that whole game later. But yeah, anyway, I think it's early mind games, just for the Bears, because I wouldn't imagine that they let go of Justin Fields, but we've seen crazier things in the NFL. Anyhow, in regards to Minnesota, Chicago here, nothing much else to say. We'll see. If Minnesota can carry this momentum going into the playoffs, like John mentioned, didn't need a one-score game to get in, so that's good for them. Finally showed a little bit of dominance as opposed to playing to your opponent, your opponent's level per se. But anyhow, let's go over to Cincinnati, where the Bengals, they took care of business against the Baltimore Ravens, 27-16. The Bengals played all their starters. It's one of those games where I probably should look at the injury report too, because had I known that Tyler Huntley was not going to be playing and it was going to be, I think it was Anthony Brown, if I see here correctly, probably would have gone. I definitely would have gone Cincinnati, but that's on me. That's why you do your homework, people. So John, you got this one right. You went with Cincinnati to cover. They did. Very close though with 11. What were your thoughts on the Bengals getting a win here and locking up the 3 seed?
Once again, I'm not sure how much this game really mattered in the grand scheme of things, because I don't know about the tiebreakers with Buffalo. Because really the only way that they could have had their seeding change would be, which is unfortunate too for the Ravens, because had that Buffalo Bengals game been played and the Bengals lost, and this could have been a game for the divisional title, which would have changed things. But unfortunately for the Ravens, it didn't change much for them. But that said, I don't know about the tiebreakers between Buffalo and Cincinnati, so this might have been a meaningless game had Buffalo held the tiebreakers. Regardless, both teams are going to be playing in the wild card round, and so you might as well just either build a confidence game or rest everybody. It seems like for the most part both teams wanted to go in there and just get their groove on before heading into the playoffs. And for the Bengals, they did that. I'm still just really concerned about their run game. They are incredibly inefficient. Joe Mixon, 2.5 yards per carry. P. Ryan, 3 yards per carry. Honestly, the most successful run games that they've had this year, outside of that one Mixon explosive game where he just went absolutely bonkers, was actually when P. Ryan was the starter for like that little 2-game stretch or whatever it was. And so I worry about them moving forward into the playoffs. But when you got a guy like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and all those weapons, you could be all right. But it is something to note that T. Higgins did get injured in this game. I don't know how serious it was. I don't think it's like season ending or anything like that, because I haven't heard anything. But it is just something to note. So yeah, good win for the Bengals, but maybe not super important in the grand scheme of things.
All right, so sorry. Just want to confirm the T. Higgins. So yeah, he is injured hip pointer, so we'll see how that affects him going forward. But in regards to the game, I mean, I already kind of alluded to it. I'm not too shocked, especially since Anthony Brown was playing. I mean, once again, we saw, although Isaiah Likely got kind of force-fed. Other than that, I mean, second best receiver was Sammy Watkins, and I don't even know the third guy, Kolar. But, I mean, kudos to him. And I'm assuming he's his NFL debut, although, once again, probably wrong. Maybe he's on another team at some point. But yeah, it will be very interesting to see what happens, especially this week with, will it be Lamar? Will it be Huntley? Because initially when he got hurt, it just seemed like the Ravens were very optimistic that he'd be back before the regular season ended. And here we are. It's not that case. It's important to remember, too, contractually, Lamar is on a contract year, and they just paid Roquan Smith. So who knows how, once again, credit Roquan for getting his money, but who knows how Lamar feels, you know what I mean? Because he's like, hey, obviously his absence has been felt. So we'll see if they can bounce back. But yeah, it will be interesting to see if the Bengals offensive line, especially, we mentioned last week that La'el Collins out for probably the year. And like you already alluded to, John, run game is already kind of suffering. And we'll see against these top tier teams if we have another, issue in the playoffs. Although once again, they made the Super Bowl despite this, where Joe Burrow is getting hit a lot. So, but a good little confidence booster for the Bengals as hopefully they can get that run game sorted out. I believe you had a baller of the week here for Cincinnati.
Yeah, I got so caught up in all the tiebreakers and stuff that I forgot that Joseph Osai, my baller of the week. Young guy out of Texas, defensive end. He had a forced fumble, he had a sack, a fumble recovery, and a touchdown. And once again, in a game that didn't look super close, if he doesn't have that sort of game-changing kind of a play, it could have been a 2016 game. Maybe we get some late-game heroics from the Ravens, but he gets that big defensive play and is able to turn the tides for the Bengals. So, yeah, Joseph Osai, my baller of the week.
And I want to add to on top of that, that fumble covered the end zone right at the end of half too. So
right,
basically just to not say free, but that's kind of backbreaking because it was 17-7. Even if the Ravens don't do anything that drive, it's a little bit better. Okay, maybe we come out, we're only down 10, but then now you're down 17 going into half, and you have Anthony Brown as your starter. So yeah, like John mentioned, big play by him to kind of tip the scales in the Bengals' favor. Now we go to the game that we were just about to talk about, which we'll get into these two organizations in a minute. But yeah, not many people are probably watching this outside of Houston and Indianapolis, as the Texans, like John mentioned, got the win here. They lose a number one spot in the draft. Now they're at number 2. They beat the Colts 32-31. And a game where it really just was pride, I guess, was on the line. Obviously, draft positioning too. Any thoughts here in regards to the Texans getting a win in Lovie Smith's last game, too, by the way, which obviously we'll talk about?
Yeah, this was an interesting game because the Texans had so much reason to lose, I guess, from an organizational standpoint. You get the number 1 pick, and you put the Colts at 5 wins, which would have 5 wins and a tie, which would have allowed the Broncos to maybe jump over them, which would have allowed the Rams, which technically would be Lions pick. Like it would have just put the Colts back a couple spots in the draft. And so a lot of reason for the Texans organizationally to want to lose the game. But that said, anytime an NFL team chooses not to tank, I always bring up the fact that to the NFL fan, maybe it doesn't make sense. But this is not Madden where the owner is controlling everything. In real life, there are players out there who they don't care about the rookie that is going to be drafted next year because they might not even be on the team. They might get replaced by that rookie. Like there's too many players out there that just genuinely do not care about that person. They're playing to earn a contract. They're playing to earn more playing time. They're playing to get a spot on another team in free agency. They're playing to retain their job. Like there's just too many grown men out there that are wanting to go out there and win, even just their pride. Like these NFL players do not enjoy losing. And also for the coaches, like, I think that Lovie Smith, maybe he would have had some sort of inkling of what was going to go on. But like, I think that he's also a prideful person and doesn't want to sit there and lose. Like no coach is out there proud of getting the #1 overall draft pick. Now they might be proud of the results that come from that guy, like a Trevor Lawrence or something like that. But just how many coaches have, had such a terrible season that got the #1 overall draft pick and then ended up being the guy that eventually turned it around later. Like usually you're the fall guy, and then when the team starts to figure it out a little bit, you kind of get moved on from, and another coach comes in. And so I don't know. I don't blame the Texans for winning the game, and for the Colts, this is kind of the best case scenario for you because you had no reason to want to win. Although they did try to make the late game rally. They, like you said, they move up to the 4th overall draft pick. And honestly, for them, that's pretty huge when it comes to potentially trying to trade up, like you mentioned earlier, and just figuring things out for the future.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add in regards to the game itself, because if I'm being frank, I really didn't care about, didn't even watch this game. Just out of my periphery. But main thing I want to talk about too is just, man, the Texans. In case you hadn't heard, Lovie Smith fired after this game after just 1 year, and just bothers me because it's like, what the heck are they doing? Because remember David Culley last year fired after a year, and once again, the second year of everyone's expecting the Texans to be bad. So what did they really do wrong? And I know, it's, like you mentioned, there's a lot of pride on the line for these players and coaches. So tanking, no one takes pride in taking that actually is a part of the organization. So, yeah, I don't know what's going on in Houston. I feel for maybe they get it right this time. I don't think they got it wrong with Lovie Smith, but once again, like as I was already alluding to, they just never really gave either of these guys a fair shake. It just felt like, right, okay, we're just putting you as a placeholder so we can get the number, so we can get a high draft pick. So yeah, it's unfortunate because Lovie Smith had some. I don't know if you remember way back when he got fired from like Tampa. I remember they fired him via text. Like they didn't even tell him in person. So poor Lovie Smith out here just being constantly disrespected. And also I wanted to point out too. I don't know if you remember last year, but there was already. I felt like the Texans hired Lovie Smith. He was already on their staff as a defensive coordinator, but I felt like they anointed him just to. There's already some like rumors and stuff swirling around them because they were interested in Josh McCown. So a lot of people were pointing at them like, hey, like they're not really following the rooting rule here. I'm not in another organization. I don't know anything. I'm just saying, like, it's just fishy stuff out of the Houston Texans. So
I just got to get this off my chest. The Texans, the most dysfunctional organization by far in the NFL. Ever since Cal McNair, he's the current owner, ever since his father passed away, who was the one that really pioneered bringing the Texans, and a football team back to Houston, there's just been so much dysfunction from Jack Easterby. I know way too much about him. He was the team chaplain that somehow got the power to anoint who the next GM and coach was going to be. And he eventually got fired, and they brought in Nick Caserio, who's from the Patriots. So you'd think that'd be more stability. But then he fires David Culley. They hire Lovie Smith, and, the stuff around, like you said, with Josh McCown, and just, there's just a lot about the Texans, and I think that this next hire has to be he has to be there for quite some time, because I think it's honestly kind of embarrassing as an organization to fire 2 head coaches in a row, where if you're firing them for performance, what did you expect from the team? Like, I don't get it. Like, my logical answer would be, there's no way you thought the Texans were going to be good, right? Like no one thought the Texans were going to be good. We both years we knew they were going to be bad, and so giving them only 1 year does not give them any time to establish a culture, to establish their identity, to establish scheme, to get chemistry with the players, to develop young players. That gives them none of that, and so expecting any of that kind of stuff to happen, it's impossible. But also, maybe then you start going down the rabbit hole of conspiracies because we know that this has existed when it came to Miami with the offering of paying to tank, and that potentially being part of the reason that they lost draft picks. They didn't necessarily cite that because I don't think the NFL wants to admit that tanking exists. But like that is on record that was an actual thing that happened. And so maybe they offered David Culley and Lovie Smith chances to tank and get compensation for it, and then when they refuse, they fire them. I don't know what's happening here, but whatever is going on for the Texans, it's just embarrassing to hire a coach and then fire them and hire another coach and then fire him. Because now if I'm a coach, that just is such an undesirable job, because why would I take that if now I feel like I'm at risk of getting fired after 1 year? Like I need some promise of stability, something. And yeah, not a good look for Houston.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I love the point you mentioned about, stability. Like, I know you're not successful, but building a culture, developing at least some of those players. So, okay, maybe, if Lovie Smith didn't work out a year or two from now, then you say, okay, you let him go. But at least those players had stability. You could see them in, his system. Just once again, you mentioned some of these guys, they're probably going to be on other teams. So, like to have good film. So, yeah, so unfortunately for all those Houston Texans players and the future ones, another regime change. That means more new head coaches and more new ideas. And okay, we want you to do this way, So, we'll see if they can get it together, and we'll see if what Indy does quarterback wise, because obviously, ever since Andrew Luck's retired, they've still been searching for the guy since then. So we'll see what they do in the offseason. Maybe they can sign him via free agency. Who knows? But Houston gets the win there, and unfortunately cost Lovie Smith his job. Anyhow, let's move over back to a game that had playoff implications. Unfortunately, though, this game you would expect it to have been the score of the Houston and Indianapolis game. But anyhow, the Dolphins needed a win to get in, especially after New England lost, and they won against the Jets 11-6. Skylar Thompson getting the win over Joe Flacco. If you want to, do quarterback v quarterback, although like score indicates, not many fireworks here, John. What were your thoughts in regards to the Dolphins eking out a win here?
Great win for the Dolphins. I thought that one of the units that's kind of their weaker ones, which is their defense, obviously deserves the credit for this win here. Held the Jets to 6 points, and they did it without forcing any turnovers, which I think is incredibly impressive. The Jets did not turn the ball over, and still the Dolphins defense held strong. And also I think it's impressive too that the Jets actually converted more third downs than the Dolphins did. And still, once again, the Dolphins were able to win. So they held really strong. They only allowed 38 rushing yards, which is crazy impressive. Although the Jets don't have like the most impressive stable of running backs, considering that Breece Hall is injured, Michael Carter is barely playing right now. Still impressive to hold them to only 38 total rushing yards on a very inefficient day. So I don't know what else to say. Like for the Dolphins, there wasn't anything crazy that really stuck out. Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert both had solid games, but I believe it's Raheem Mostert who broke a finger or something in his hand and could miss time. We'll see. But yeah, shout out to the Dolphins defense, because in a game where you're on your third string quarterback, your receiver Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, they only combined for about 60 receiving yards because the passing game is so inefficient and just not able to take advantage of big plays. You got a good defense on the other side. Their defense just stepped up in a really massive way. So shout out to the Dolphins defense.
Yeah, you mentioned Raheem Mostert. It was a thumb injury. And according to David Furones, apologize, I mispronounced your name, David, of the South Florida Sentinel, it is quote unquote serious. So, could be big for them coming in their playoff, as obviously they're already missing or could be missing, Tua and or Teddy Bridgewater in their opening playoff matchup. I really don't have much else to add. I will say, Joe, for the Jets offense, like, I mean, I know it wasn't Mike White, but it was Joe Flacco, and there's still some people saying out there saying, "Oh, well, Joe Flacco would have done better than Zach Wilson." Well, there you go. Didn't really do much better. I mean, he force-fed Garrett Wilson night with 17 targets. I know he had 9 receptions, 89 yards, but like you mentioned, that was about it. And yeah, credits for the Dolphins defense because they've been, like you mentioned, they've been such a takeaway dependent defense that it's good to see them just get stops, not rely on forcing turnovers and being over aggressive. Although, like I already kind of alluded to, it is the Jets. I've mentioned this offensive line's not good, and the receivers are still relatively young, and we know the quarterback situation's a mess. So we'll see what happens for them. Unfortunate beat for you too, that I texted you too, and for many others betting on this one because there was someone too that had the exact score 6-9, and they would have the Jets would have covered. John would have gotten the win via the spread, and many others, but Jets decided to do the laterals. And once again, like Joe Flacco's in the game, and you're laddering it back to Joe Flacco at his age. Things are not going to go well. And like
I've always thought too, like if you're going to do the lateral game, like I don't know, I guess you want to maintain the little bit of surprise of like not bringing out like a running back at the quarterback spot, but you like bring out Chris Streveler or something, like
yeah, he's already more mobile,
some sort of an athlete, not 40-year-old Joe Flacco.
Yeah, it's like definitely shades of when Mac Jones got stiff armed by Chandler Jones off that lateral. Except Joe's Joe. Anyhow, credit to the Dolphins to get the win. They do get in, but we'll see if they can get healthy enough again to face off against the Bills. That's who they got for a wild card weekend. So we'll see if Tua can get through a concussion protocol. And I think Teddy's dealing with a pinky injury from week 4. But anyhow, let's go over to a game that didn't have much meaning. Once again, another pride game. And it was between the Carolina Panthers and the New Orleans Saints. Panthers win 10-7, although, as the score indicates, incredibly defensive game. Sam Darnold only threw for 43 passing yards, 5 of 15. But that wasn't the team around him did enough to win here. Any thoughts in regards to Panthers Saints?
Unfortunately, a meaningless game. Hypothetically, if Carolina had won last week, then with the performance Atlanta put up, you never know. Obviously, that game could have gone differently too had they played all their starters. But yeah, so I guess good win for the Panthers. To the fact that you won a game despite your quarterback throwing for 43 yards and 2 interceptions is crazy. I don't know. Just a really, really rough game. Especially, I don't know, when you look at the box score too, I'd be like, wow, the Saints probably crushed them. But that one touchdown, that was all they had. They couldn't even get field goals. So I don't know. I guess tough defensive battle, but I have nothing else to say, to be honest.
Yeah, if you look at the box score too, and you kind of alluded to, there was a interception by Tyrann Mathieu taking 41 yards. So you're like, okay, you think the Saints maybe would have scored there? Because I think they only scored on their opening possession. And that was it. And that was a golden opportunity, but then they fumbled later going down that drive. And yeah, like I said, the score indicates it was not a very pretty game. I'm sure both these teams, especially Carolina, will be in the quarterback market as well. Yeah, I would imagine the Saints. Imagine the experiment of Jameis Winston / Andy Dalton should be done, especially if Daniel Allen does want to keep his job. If he does stay there, who knows? He might get let go. At any point. But yeah, key win for the Panthers, I guess. Good win for Steve Wilkes. We'll see if if he gets a job somewhere else, maybe as a DC, but hopefully for him as a head coach, because I've said it before, he never really got a fair shake. And Arizona is one of those one and done type years, and he had Josh Rosen, so we all know how that turned out for him. But like we saw here, kind of helped Carolina, I would say, turn around their season. Definitely gave them a little more hope as they were in playoff contention towards the end there. But yeah, 2 talented teams, just need a few more pieces to figure it out, and maybe different, offensive or coaching staffs. But let's go over to Pittsburgh, where the Steelers were playing for their playoff lives, need a few things to happen, but also for Mike Tomlin's, above 500 streak, keeping that alive. They did that. They beat the Browns 28-14. Not a great game for the Browns, but obviously a great one for Pittsburgh. Any thoughts here, John, in regards to Steelers getting a win here?
I don't have too many thoughts about like the game itself, to be honest. Good win for the Steelers. A solid performance from Kenny Pickett. George Pickens had another solid performance. I would like to see George Pickens get more catches, but that's something they can work on next year. But yeah, I just think it's really impressive that like their team stepped up when it mattered for their coach. Although they didn't get to make it to the playoffs, they did what they needed to do in this final week to try and secure that spot. It just came down to the Dolphins, unfortunately, won the game and they did not get to make it. So shout out to the Steelers. Mike Tomlin still has not had a losing season. And I don't know. I think that's incredibly impressive.
Yeah, and they have some toys to play. They have that middle-ish first-round pick now. They seem to have their quarterback so they can address other issues. They have a very early second-round pick. Maybe they package that up to move up if there's a position or a guy that they want. But in terms of this game, also, they had Cleveland's offensive line running in circles because they had, I think it was 5 sacks on Deshaun Watson. We know Deshaun Watson, even though he's been out of football for a couple of years, especially with a couple of games under his belt, still pretty good at being mobile, making guys miss, but that did not happen. Pittsburgh did a great job of kind of containing him. And Cleveland, we'll see what happens. They already let go of their defensive coordinator. The whole Clowney stuff, kind of went down right before the game, before Sunday. He was obviously disgruntled, if you don't know. So yeah, we'll see what happens with the Browns. Obviously, a big year next year. This year's a little bit excused. The guy they traded all their assets for was out, but now they have an off season, and we'll see if they can get right back in the mix. And for Pittsburgh, yeah, just good old Mike Tomlin, man. Always getting his team. And another one of the guys like Mike Vrabel, where like he definitely imprints his identity, his mindset onto the team, and it seems like the team loves that and rallies. And not that all teams don't rally, but the team definitely has a extra motivation, extra rallying power behind him. We'll see what Pittsburgh does. But they, despite not making the playoffs, very good end to the season, as they almost did. And Kenny Pickett got some confidence. And like you mentioned, George Pickens had a pretty good end to the season as well. So we'll see what they do. But now we go over to a quote-unquote meaningless game as between the Chargers and the Denver Broncos. Chargers starters played actually surprisingly a little bit more than many people expected, and they lost to the Broncos. Russell Wilson played the whole game. The Broncos win 31-28 here. Any thoughts in regards to this game and how maybe it might affect the Chargers next week?
Yeah, another interesting game because it did affect seeding a little bit. Oh, actually, did it? I think the Chargers are the 5th seed. Right? Yeah, they play Jacksonville. So
yeah, they're still the 5th seed. Same record as Baltimore. So I'm guessing they held the tiebreaker because they both had the same record going into this.
Right.
The game.
So
maybe?
It only really would have affected seeding, I guess, if
Baltimore had
Ravens had won. Yeah. So it doesn't really affect them a ton next week. But I do think it's interesting from the standpoint of, okay, you came out here and your starters did play for quite a good amount. And I don't know, like, I think that their defense, they had some really strong performances to end the year here. But then in this performance, maybe you just gave a little bit of a blueprint to the Jaguars for how to win this game. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but for the most part, in what could have been a meaningless game, because do you know what time this game was played, actually? Was this like a 12 p.m. game?
I'll pull it up now. I think it was let's see. Probably should have put.
I think this was an afternoon game, right?
I think it was an afternoon game. So it happened after Cincinnati and Baltimore.
So
if that was the case, because yeah, they're both with 2 West Coast. I know Denver's in Colorado, but 2 quote unquote West Coast teams. Those usually play in the afternoon.
Right. So I guess maybe, once again, trying to build confidence going into next week, but by that point they would have known that it's a meaningless game had it been afternoon. So I don't really know. Once again, we'll see next week how they fare with the Jacksonville Jaguars. But offensively, I mean, you put up 28 points, so that's good. But in terms of Your defense giving up 31 to Denver, who I think has only scored 30 twice this year, one against the Chiefs and one against the Raiders. I don't know. I think this was kind of an uninspiring performance. And once again, doesn't matter that much because ultimately, if you can handle your business next week, then who cares? But yeah, otherwise, I don't really know what to take away from this game outside of, I guess it does affect draft position a little bit too. Denver did not have anything to play for because their pick is in Seattle. So Seattle's kind of sitting there watching this game like, oh, Chargers, come on. Well, I guess not watching it because they're actually playing while this is happening, but hoping that the Chargers could, just handle their business. And unfortunately, their pick's a little bit lower. So unfortunate for Seattle, kind of a last second moral victory for Russell Wilson, maybe, to not allow Seattle to get a higher pick. But in the grand scheme, a little bit meaningless, but we'll see how it plays out next week.
Yeah. I think if I remember correctly too, Joey Bosa left early with with an injury. I'm not sure how that will affect him going forward. But I think too, especially for like Derwin James, he had missed a couple of games. So I think it was just let's get Derwin and it's always that, do you rest versus rust? You know what I mean? So yeah, maybe schematically though, maybe Brandon Staley kept it really simple, although he was playing his starters. So maybe, not give things away. Because, Russell did have a little bit of a bounce back performance, although it was mainly the run game, which we mentioned that can be an issue that the Broncos leaned on, as Latavius Murray had a good game, and really all their backs were efficient outside of Russell Wilson, but, he's a quarterback. Jerry Jeudy had a really good game, too. So, yeah, it is good to see him and Jeudy kind of maybe getting that chemistry going together, and we'll see. Hopefully they can get Javonte Williams fully back and healthy, although who knows if he'll be ready by the season start, as well as a couple of the linemen were injured, Garrett Bowles as well. So, for the Seahawks, mainly just get healthy and also figure out, I guess, they've been rumored to be, wanting Sean Payton. So we'll see who they get to call and design plays for Russell Wilson to see, if they can make that work, since they obviously, like we mentioned in the previous episode, they've pretty much dug their feet in with the contract extension they gave him, and for lack of a better phrase, are stuck with him. So you got to make it work somehow. So maybe this will be a blueprint for that. But for the Chargers, they will play next week. So we'll see if not resting will help them or if it will inhibit them. But anyhow, now speaking of resting, that's where we're going to go to the Giants, where the Giants definitely rested a bunch of their guys. It was Davis Webb to get the start as opposed to Daniel Jones. No Saquon either. But kept the game surprisingly close, especially since the Eagles, for the most part, played their starters. Jalen Hurts, for example, played the entire game. And the Eagles win this one 22-16. Like I just already mentioned, not the prettiest, not the most blowout win that we expected. Although, to be fair, Eagles went up 19-0 and then kind of, I guess, slept walk the rest of the game, or in that fourth quarter. Any thoughts in regards to the Eagles getting a win over the Giants? Second stringers here, John?
Good win. I've been mentioning, you don't want to lose this first round bye. This is just such an inherent advantage that you don't have to play a wild card game. And I think it's less about the rest to me and more about the fact that you're guaranteed to make it, because in the NFL, when the playoffs start, as lopsided as some of these matchups might seem to be, anybody can lose. In the NFL, the playoffs, it's very brutal. It's not like the NBA playoffs where you got a 7-game series and the better team usually should come out on top. This is a game where if you have one bad performance, if somebody tweaks their ankle and has to miss half the game, if you have a couple mistakes, all of a sudden you could be eliminated. So the Eagles, they handle the business. They have secured the first round bye. Like you said, for the most part, they dominated in this game. The score was not as close as it seemed outside of the late rally from the Giants. And for the Giants, it didn't matter. It doesn't affect seeding. So I guess you're a little happy that maybe you had a little bit of confidence at what happened at the end of the game. But for the most part, these are backups. Saquon's not playing. Daniel Jones isn't playing. You got, some of your backup receivers and Kenny Golladay, who I guess is a backup now. A pretty meaningless game for them. And so I guess for the Giants, you got the rest you wanted and actually were able to still be largely competitive, at least in the end. And for the Eagles, you handled your business. I will say for the Giants, because honestly, I think everybody expected the Eagles to win this game. The only thing that I really take away from this one is, well coached defensive game plan from them, from Wink Martindale, because for the most part, the Eagles were not, going out in there and dominating. They had, I think it was just one touchdown drive. That one Boston Scott touchdown drive, and everything else was field goals. So maybe that just gives you some confidence heading into next week in what could be a tough performance, or not tough performance, a tough game, in Minnesota on the road. Other than that, don't have much to say.
Yeah, don't have much else to add on my end. You kind of hit it all. So we'll just move this train along. But I think that was the big spread. One of the big spreads that killed you, I think, right? That was the only one, because you won Cincinnati.
That was the big one, because the next game we're going to talk about, I got that big spread right. I got the Cincinnati right. I got the Chiefs right, but I didn't lock it. So this one, the biggest, tied for the biggest of the week. Yeah, that late rally for the Giants screwed me. Also, their inability to score touchdowns.
That too, yeah. But anyhow, let's go to that one. It was San Francisco, the 49ers, beating the Arizona Cardinals 38-13. Obviously, Niners had something to play for, so most of their starters were playing, and it was David Blau for the Cardinals, so not too shocking. Any thoughts here before we talk about the Cardinals finally firing Cliff Kingsbury?
No real thoughts on the game outside of the fact that this was the big one. Yeah, J.J. Watt's last game could be DeAndre Hopkins' last sighting in Arizona, because there's rumors they're going to trade him. I don't think he played because of injury, but he was at least present. Could be his last sighting there, and some major shakeups. Like you said, Cliff Kingsbury fired by the Arizona Cardinals. Also, general manager Steve Keim, who had previously announced he was stepping away from the team, I believe has made that like permanent and official that he is not going to be GM moving forward. I know that I feel fine about it, because I thought that it was not a terrible, but a bad hire in the first place. So I guess, you're moving on. But that said, I don't know. I don't really have any other thoughts about that, because I've just talked about firing Cliff Kingsbury for so many years that it feels like I kind of already got it all out. Yeah,
just to put a bow on it, because we've both been on that side. And I had someone in one of my fantasy chats, and someone near and dear to my heart, so no egg on them, but they were like, I don't understand it. I thought Cliff was doing good, and I didn't say it in the chat, but if they're listening, you can hear the better explanation, hopefully. First off, look at all the investments they put into the offense. We talked about how lack of schematics. We showed, or we referenced the route tree from last year that Andre Hopkins just ends and out routes basically. I think we kind of saw that the air raid mentality and just style. There's a reason why it has not worked in the NFL. And, he had, like I said, they poured resources into it. They have Kyler Murray. Their offensive line was relatively solid. They actually had good backs for a while, too, but didn't really use them. We know they had stacked receivers. They had D-Hop, and, we saw, it was last year, Chris and Kirk made plays, and Zach Ertz. And then, this year they traded for Hollywood Brown, and Greg Dortch was kind of a bright spot. But then there's also Andy Isabella, early second-round pick. Didn't work out at all. Obviously he needed to go, and we'll see what happens here. Obviously losing J.J. Watt really hurts too, because he was probably really, even at this late stage of his career, he's still really solid, but obviously their best front four guy. We'll see, because they have a few holes to fill. Kyler Murray won't be ready for week 1 probably, coming off an ACL injury, so it'll be very interesting what approach they take and who they decide to hire to replace, like John mentioned, not just the coaching spot, but the GM as well. Because I also had a bit of an issue with Steve Kimes for a while, because like I mentioned with Steve Wilkes, felt like he kind of scapegoated him, and Kimes kind of got away because he also had some very poor drafts. As you can probably ask any Arizona fan, they had some notable misses here and there, like any team, but sometimes more than others. But big win for San Fran, and they are if I'm going to double check, they are the 2 seed. They unfortunately don't get the 1 seed since, like we mentioned, Philly took care of business. But nonetheless, San Francisco rolling into the playoffs, full steam ahead. But now we go to we stay in the same division, but we're going over to Seattle, where the Seahawks, they had to play and to at least have a chance. They had to win to have a chance to get in the playoffs. Needed some help, which we'll talk about that later. But they win in overtime, 19-16 over the LA Rams. Wasn't pretty. Geno threw a couple picks, but nonetheless, they get the job done. Who would have thunk it, John? We didn't, especially me. Did not think Seattle would even be sniffing playoff contention, but here we are. They are, heck, who would have thought they would have been, above 500? So anyway, what were your thoughts on Seattle getting this big win?
Yeah, I just want to say that the Coach of the Year race is probably really hotly contested. Brian Daboll, Pete Carroll, Doug Peterson, like 3 teams that nobody was really saying would be playoff bound, and here they are. Great win for Seattle. The Detroit Lions were probably sitting there watching this game really torn because in terms of the organization when it comes to draft position, they needed Seattle to win to get a higher draft pick. But obviously, the larger matter is they needed Seattle to lose this game in order for the game that they played later to get them into the playoffs. For the Lions, unfortunately, Seattle did pull it out. I guess they got rewarded with a higher draft pick, but they do not get to make the playoffs. And for Seattle, impressive performance. You were in a position where, they were under siege, right? They go into halftime down 13-6. It's not looking good. They respond in the third quarter. They get a touchdown. And in the fourth quarter, they get the field goal, and they control the game in overtime to get the field goal as well. Kenneth Walker had a solid day. Wasn't super efficient, but he had a solid day. Geno Smith, unfortunately, did turn the ball over a couple times. But overall, the team responded. The defense responded. And for Seattle, you are playoff bound despite a season where everybody really kind of thought this would be a rebuilding year and there'd be a terrible season and Geno Smith couldn't be that guy. And here we are with Seattle with a winning record, 9-8. They are in the playoffs. I don't know, just really impressed by that. And just a real fun stat. Unlike Mike Tomlin, Pete Carroll does not have, no losing seasons, but he has never missed the playoffs in back-to-back seasons in Seattle, which I do think is really interesting. This would have been the year that he could have, but this team, they responded and they made it.
Yeah, only thing I want to add to is a big step up by Seattle's defense, especially in overtime, giving their kicker another chance because their kicker missed the field goal in regulation. I think it's Josh Myers was their kicker, missed the one in regulation. It was 46 yards, which is relatively hittable in the NFL. That's what you want, consider hittable for your field goal kicker. But then, obviously the turnover, a couple of runs to big runs and passes, and they got in position. So, gritty. It's typical, kind of the way Seattle's been doing it. Sometimes it's offensive fireworks, but some games it's 16-19, and they kind of had to eke it out. But yeah, what a story for Geno Smith too. I'm assuming he's probably the favorite for comeback player of the year, although didn't really come back from an injury. But the criteria is very loose for the comeback player of the year. But yeah, him and Kenneth Walker looking really good too. And then Tyler Lockett with a key touchdown. Him coming off that, I forget it was hand related. I forget it was a thumb or his hand, but he's obviously him playing is big for them as they go into the playoffs, and they've shown they can be a scary matchup for anybody. Like you mentioned, John, unlike NBA, it's only one game, so sometimes you may get the other team's best shot while you're just playing your worst. We'll see, though. But big win for Seattle. And let's go over, though, before we go to the Sunday nighter, let's go to your game where the Cowboys are also playing for, seedings, has potential winning the division if the Eagles had lost. The Commanders kind of spoiled that for you, John, as they win 26-6. I did not get to watch this game, so I'm going to lean on you here. What were your thoughts on your Cowboys dropping this one?
For the record, this game was actually meaningless because the Eagles did win. So it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things that they lost. So I do feel like some people are making a little bit bigger of a deal of it than it is. That said, not an encouraging sign when you're heading into the playoffs. I mean, you're still a 12-5 football team, but just kind of an embarrassing result. No run game really whatsoever. Like Zeke, 8 carries for 10 yards. Tony Pollard, 7 carries for 19 yards. Even the backup Malik Davis, only 5 carries for 19 yards. Like just no run game whatsoever. Dak did not, play the greatest of games. He did throw an interception that was pretty bad. He tried to throw this comeback route that almost got intercepted. And then the next play, they ran the exact same thing and it did get intercepted and went to the house for a touchdown. That was not good. I don't know why Kellen Moore called the exact same route. I don't know why Dak decided to test the corner who literally just almost housed it the play before, but he did, and Kendall Fuller got that touchdown. For the receivers, man, it's the Cowboys are just in a really tough spot right now where like it brings me back to Amari Cooper. Like, Amari Cooper, whatever your qualms were with him, the Cowboys had the cap space to retain him. They didn't use that cap space on anything meaningful, and they only got a 5th round draft pick for him. And unfortunately for Michael Gallup, he has had moments this year, but in terms of his overall season, I would say I've been kind of disappointed. Like he's not creating separation like he used to. He is good at contested catches, but to try and rely on that every play because he can't get separation is tough, especially considering that we just signed him to a 4 or 5 year extension. It's not massive money, but that's still just like we need him to step up. And Noah Brown also is our 3rd best receiver. Like it's just not the move. Like he had a little stretch earlier in the year. People thought he could be relevant, but Noah Brown throughout his career has always been more of a run blocker and used in like special teams and all that kind of stuff. And so all of a sudden just expecting him to be the 3rd or 2nd guy on the receiving core, I don't buy that he's going to be that guy. I think he could be a solid 4th option. He can have those little spurts, but not as the 3rd guy. And so I don't know, just not a super, I don't know the word, not a super inspiring. Result for next week when you got to go to Tampa on the road in a playoff game. And also my biggest critique of this game is the fact that the coaching staff, I hope that maybe they just didn't check the score, but the Eagles were up 16-0 at halftime. And so at that point, Giants got the backups in. It's a shutout at halftime. We don't need to keep the starters in there. And I think up until like 2 minutes left in the game, they had Dak and the starters still out there. And I genuinely just do not understand that. If somebody got hurt, just even like Tampa, at least they got more rest because they benched the guys at some point. Like I just really do not understand that mentality. They did the exact same thing against Minnesota when it was like a 40-point blowout. So the opposite result of like you're winning big, and I still kept them out there. I'm just not a fan of the way the staff has kind of managed the roster during some of these games where it's like they don't need to be playing. We do not need to see them out there in a 26-6 result late in the 4th quarter when the game is literally meaningless. Yeah, I mean, they threw him out there at some point, but like Cooper Rush got 1 throw and Malik Davis got 5 carries. So I'm pretty sure that was literally just the last drive of the game. So I don't know. It's just frustrating. I don't know. I've already prepared myself mentally for all possible playoff scenarios. So we'll see. I'm not going to get into that now, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll obviously talk about that later in the week. We'll make our wild card picks, and yeah, we definitely go over all that. But let's go. It's okay, John. You're not the only one that's feeling a little down. Because now we go to my game, where the Detroit Lions, they knew they didn't have a chance, but Dan Campbell said, even said on the broadcast, hey, we don't want them to get in. And they didn't let us into the playoffs as Lions pull out all the stops, had a great game. A little bit of a Jamal Williams revenge game as he had 2 touchdowns as well. And they beat my Packers 20-16. I'll throw it to you first, and then I'll go on my little soliloquy. Any thoughts in regards to the Lions spoiling my Packers' playoff chances?
I'll just get it out of the way now. Shout out to my offense bar of the week, Jamal Williams. He did get 2 touchdowns, 72 rushing yards. I don't know, just in a very crucial game that could have been crucial for the Lions. I thought that Jamal Williams really stepped up. It's his former team. It's in Lambeau. Just a lot of emotions going there. And he managed to have a really good performance. So Jamal Williams is my offensive baller of the week. But yeah, for the Lions, didn't have much to play for outside of being the spoiler, and it's a divisional opponent. So, you got that motivation to do so. So good win for them. Also, I don't know the last time they had a winning season, maybe 2015 or somewhere around there when they last made the playoffs.
I'm about to say, was it the year when y'all knocked them out on that potential PI call or whatever?
Yeah, the controversial.
I want to say that was the last time. It all fell apart.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they have not had a winning season since then. So good for them to have a winning season. Shout out to Dan Campbell, a guy who I was critical of early in the year because preseason, I thought that this would be a good season, that they could turn some stuff around, that they'd be moving in the right direction, which is ultimately what the season became. But early in the year, I believe they started 1-6, and so there was a lot of talk of like, well, maybe Dan Campbell isn't the guy, and he shut everybody up, including me, and lived up to those preseason expectations. So shout out to Dan Campbell, another guy who's in the Coach of the Year running. Unfortunately, that he didn't make the playoffs, so he doesn't have that on the resume for the year, but he's certainly in the running for it still. And then for the Packers, just a really tough way to go out, honestly. You're at home. Christian Watson, he had a pretty solid performance. It wasn't like he lit the world up on fire, but like throughout the early part of the year, the big critique was the lack of receiver that could step up. He had 100 receiving yards, and I think that's noteworthy. But they did lose 2 turnovers. Aaron Jones on that fumble. Aaron Rodgers did throw that interception. He did throw another one that got called back because of some weird flag. I can't remember what the flag was, like defensive holding or something.
It was hands to the face to it was one of the defensive linemen. He was all up in Bakhtiari's face. Literally.
Yeah, which is kind of a pointless penalty. So could have got worse when it came to the touchdowns. But yeah, I don't know. I just after the game, honestly. And I think that Aaron Rodgers is still an incredibly talented quarterback. And I'm not going to do what the media is doing where they're just blaming everything on him, because I don't think he's entirely to blame. He didn't have a great performance, and I do think he does deserve blame, but there's more than enough to go around. But it just, the saying that you always bring up, you brought it up a lot about Ben Roethlisberger, of if you're talking about retirement, you probably should do it. You don't want to have that one foot out the door kind of a thing. And Aaron Rodgers has talked about it before, but after the game, he's bringing it up again. And I'm just wondering, like, man, is your heart still in it? Are you still motivated to go for it? Like, do you I don't know if he has that same fire that maybe he used to have, just considering the amount of talk about retirement. And so I don't know. We talked about it earlier in the season before they went on their run of, do you move on to Jordan Love? I think at this point, if I'm the Packers, I'm looking to trade Aaron Rodgers for a lion's share of draft picks. Packers fans may feel differently because of the sentimental value and, wanting to have him retire there and all that stuff. And if that's the case, I'm fine with that. I don't know where Aaron Rodgers fully stands on it, but he's mentioned it. So anyway, I don't know. Just a really tough way to go out. And yeah, in a win again in scenario against the Lions, a divisional opponent at home, this is a very tough pill to swallow, I imagine.
Yeah. I'm gonna start. I don't think we can trade Rodgers because of his new contract. I think that's so. I think we're literally stuck with him. Like, so either he retires and that will save us obviously money when he retires, or not.
I heard that, which this would not be the most ideal scenarios, but there is some sort of finagle room if he was traded after the draft. So
Or he could always restructure, probably, if he did really want out, and they could probably move the money,
But once again, it depends on, does he have the motivation to want to make it happen too, and who would want to trade for him? What's the price tag? All that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to trade for a guy who's threatening to retire, and they trade 3 first-round picks and he retires after a year.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to lead to is in regards to Aaron being traded. I don't think that'll happen. I mean, like Gary just said, I'm not sure if a team's going to want a 40-year-old, like you said, who's one foot's already half the door. And I think Chris Simmons mentioned this good point too. I think Aaron Rodgers enjoys being the king of the castle at Lambeau. He enjoys, being the guy, because that's really all he got. But
also, just on that point too, I think for Green Bay, it's a very unique situation where there's no owner. So the quarterback is the guy kind of. Yes. The quarterback, the head coach, those are the guys in Green Bay. It's also a small town. There's not competing professional sports teams. In especially just in the local area of Green Bay, even just the overall state of Wisconsin, you are that dude.
Yeah. So in regards to this game, I mean, yeah, we had our opportunities, yada yada. Obviously, Quay Walker, dumb mistake, and to give him obviously dumb mistake. Give him a little bit of context. I feel like some people are going a little bit too hard. I understand the criticism, but some people are saying, you could just going way too far. And I'm like, it was a Georgia teammate of his, DeAndre Swift, on the ground. Granted, like I said, still a bonehead mistake. Come on, man, let the medical staff do their thing. I know it's your friend, but don't push the medical staff, especially in light of recent events. And obviously it hurt when he went out, because I feel like you saw it a couple of times in the broadcast. Defense was a little bit confused. He doesn't have the the mic. You know, he doesn't have the
Right.
green dot, but he's still a critical piece. Him and Devondre Campbell, and you saw that especially after he went out and in both facets, pass and run for Quay Walker.
Right. Also, you mentioned the recent events, and that, and also combined with the fact that he did get into that little scuffle with the Bills. I think it was
on, and that was on the sideline. But yeah,
but just like after that, it's like, hey man, just take every precaution and just don't touch anybody.
We all saw Matt LaFleur really dig into that.
Right.
And obviously he was very emotional coming out the field. So I think Quay's kind of learned his lesson, obviously. But obviously he's not it's a reason we lost. But and this is where my next point is. I mean, usually, and I think you've been for most of these, like, I'm not typically one to say Aaron Rodgers has a large portion of the blame. I'm usually say, listen, like, our defense, we're not there because Aaron Rodgers, like, there's a lot of other things. But I will put, this might be the one where I put this might be the most percentage of blame I put on Aaron Rodgers in one of these situations. I mentioned in our group chat a lot, and I saw it early in the game, especially as the game went on, a lot of 8, even 9-man boxes at one point. And Aaron Rodgers is still either handing it off or at times just going to his check down. And we saw they point out on the broadcast too. I think there was a time in the second half where we motioned Watson from the right to the left and he was kind of open down the seam, but Rodgers never even never looked at him, just looked toward Lazard and then kind of tried to throw him a back shoulder / fade route that wasn't completed. There was also, I think, an Aaron Jones throw too that he kind of missed that, typical Aaron doesn't miss, but he's missed them in this one. I mentioned it before early in the season, just the lack of aggressiveness. It just feels like, and I wonder if it's because of the age, because of the abuse he's taken. And remember, I don't know if you remember in the game too, they even said, oh yeah, Aaron, came after this drive and he was holding his thumb and they looked at it. And listen, I'm not saying Aaron's a pansy or anything, but when you start getting injured, especially when you're older age, like we've seen it with Tom Brady, every now and then, if you get hits on him early in the game, he's kind of jumpy, wants to get the ball out quicker, doesn't, fully let his reads and develop. What happened? This was kind of going on with Aaron Rodgers this season. This is why, you mentioned like it seems like retirement should be. It feels like retirement should be the option, and that's why basically, I don't mind regardless either way if Aaron Rodgers comes back. I'm hoping that if he does come back, maybe these are things he sees in the offseason that LaFleur looks at him and goes, hey man, like look at this, like look at all these plays that you didn't even give these guys chances. You didn't look down the field. You weren't aggressive. You just checked it down to the running back or just threw it away. So and if it's Jordan Love, I'd be very excited to see, because I know it was only a very small sample size, but I think it was was it the Philly game? I forget what game he got in. It was a blowout. Or no, it was a Philly game because Rodgers, we were losing, and that's why Love got thrown in. But he actually looked pretty solid, like throwing the ball, especially at least more confident. So, and if he's going to be at least more aggressive and trust the reads that are given, especially when the play's working, when there is a Christian Watson 20 yards down the seam that you can throw a rifle to, So we'll see what happens. Obviously, who the heck knows what Aaron's going to do. And we also have some major questions going into this offseason. I mean, Preston Smith, we'll see if we retain him. He, at times, looked like a solid number 2 edge guy, but I think he showed this game not number 1 anymore. Just a tough loss, especially at home. And with Aaron Rodgers, you kind of expect, like everyone, I think that's why there's been this overreaction, is that you expect he's come through in so many of these moments. Like back when Jay Cutler was on the Bears, I remember he came off Lily had just come off his collarbone injury, first game back, made that amazing throw. I'm sure you remember, to Randall Cobb, 50 yards. It was busted coverage, but he made the throw. You know what I mean? He made also plays that game. As opposed to this year, just hasn't felt like he hasn't come through in this moment as much. So we'll see what happens with Aaron. Maybe he needs more or less ayahuasca. Who knows? But definitely not the way you want to end the season for the Packers. But I'm not going to sit here and cry about it. We still got a lot of hope. And for the Lions, though, a lot to love out of them, and we will definitely see what they can do. I know everyone's talking about the Bears. That's what I'm supposed to look up, actually. I know the Bears have a lot of cap. I want to see how much cap space the Lions have, because I know they don't have the number 1 overall pick, but they might have some money to play with as well. But I can't figure that out. Anyway, that is the Week 18 results. You mentioned Jamal was your ball of the week. To wrap up the standings, I know we'll do the playoffs. But John went 9-7 this week. I went 8-8. So technically, I think I went 2 games ahead of you going into the playoffs. So it could happen. But like I mentioned, very much less games in the playoffs, so it'll be harder to do so. But anything else you wanted to go over before we call it there?
That's going to be it. Just for any NFL fan, start getting ready to start hearing every rumor in the book, because we've already started to hear the Broncos and the
Sean
Cardinals and the Sean Payton and their
D'Amico Ryans has gotten a few calls, which is good for him. He's been deserving it.
Jim Harbaugh's back in the rumor mill and apparently going to interview the Broncos. Like all the drama surrounding the NFL offseason for a little over half the league. We're there.
Just add one more thing too, the guy in Green Bay thing. Maybe getting Nathaniel Hackett back maybe helps. I don't know. Maybe Nathaniel's an extra voice that Aaron needs to hear to say, hey, like, let's go back to what we did. Like, be aggressive. Like, yes, you're going to take hits, but anyway. So yeah, but that's also part of the rumor mill. Maybe we bring back Nathaniel Hackett, which I wouldn't mind as a Packer fan. I thought he was really good as an OC, and maybe he's one of those guys that we talk about that's just best as a coordinator and not a head coach. But he's still young. He'll have another chance. Anyways, if you want to follow us or mention us or, add us, talk, comment and such, provide your opinions and thoughts, you can always hit up on our socials. Our Instagram's at Shut Up and Ball Pod. Twitter and TikTok are at Shut Up and Ball. And we do have a Facebook page, like I mentioned before, once again. We do have our YouTube which is just Shut Up and Ball. That's the page. And we are on all free podcast mediums. But that will do it for John and myself. We'll be back later in the week to make our our wild card picks for this wild card, kind of like a super wild card weekend, because there's a Monday night game, which personally I'm not a big fan of, but whatever. So we'll go over all 6 of those games later in the week. We'll see you all later. Adios.